I am Christine Medina. I am originally from Phoenix, Arizona. I am an undergrad in behavioral science, and I am going to be interviewing Joseph for a project that I have, a research paper that I have for my anthropology class. And I'll be asking questions regarding Santeria and Ifa.
Awesome, Christine. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, especially as you're going forward in your academic journey. In any way we can aid that, whether it's myself or the Our Roots establishment, we're very excited at the prospects of you achieving your goals. So definitely, please.
Thank you so much, Joseph, first for taking the time out of your busy schedule to help me with my paper. For me, it's a great honor to be able to speak to you. I've been following you for over a year now, and the knowledge and everything that you put into the world really helps me to be able to delegate and to be able to maneuver in life a little bit easier. So it was very easy for me to when the subject came up or when the semester assignment came up, I right away thought about Santeria, and I knew that I could come, at least to speak to you. My intention was just to get a couple of questions answered. So it's a great honor to be able to be a guest on the podcast itself.
Definitely. And, a couple questions usually turns into a whole conversation. So we're excited. And I tell you, even before you get started, anthropology was actually going to be my course of study. When I realized it was the study of culture and human beings, I've always been fascinated by both. But the reason I didn't continue is because I had to wait quite a few semesters just to get to the culture I was most interested in, which was the Yoruba and Afro descendant diasporic cultures. So, being somebody that didn't finish their collegiate education conventionally, it's very exciting to be a part of this.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. And, when I first got into my area of study, my main goal was to gain a degree in behavioral science, but more of a psychotherapist in trauma. And then the more that I wanted to gain a perspective on the human being and, just the functions of the brain and everything. And I think for me, what brought it all together is you had an episode with a psychologist who I believe she was in Puerto Rico, and she had blended, I think, mainly just the constructs of adding also spirituality with it. And I think that's so important, especially for ethnic cultures, to have that understanding that it may not just be something of a psychological issue or a challenge that they might be having. It could be spiritual, and gaining that understanding, especially going back to the roots of it all, of where it all begins. I think it allows me to be able to, again, maneuver through and to be able to connect all of the elements together.
Yeah, the professional that you're referencing is Dr. 𝗃𝗵𝗄𝗏, and
Yes.
she is actually of Cuban descent, and she actually eradicates in Miami, Florida, where her practice is. Within her practice of psychoanalysis, she's a Jungian psychologist, from what I understand. So it was a really great episode, especially when she was able to talk about the pineal gland and how it
Mhm.
plays a role, and it's still very mysterious, and there may be spiritual phenomena and frequency that emanate from it. So it was one of the episodes I enjoyed the most because it provided a lot of confirmation to this spiritual science and medicine that
Mhm.
was Ifa, 5,000, 10,000 years before we had advanced techniques to be able to do these studies and get this info.
Right, absolutely. And so one of my main questions would be is, in the religion itself, how has it shaped you through your years from when you were younger all the way up to your, presently right now? How has it shaped you in the world around you?
Wow, that's fabulous. I'll say that Ifa really has guided my path. Not only spiritually, I think to be able to get to a spiritual, revelation, or experience, there has to be a social aspect of it, an emotional aspect of it. And when I used to look at these gentlemen that were the babalawos, and these people in this culture, they were my idols. They were my heroes. To see them wearing the bracelets and being a part of functions, It was just something I wanted to be a part of. But, as I started learning about Ifa and the philosophy of it, I realized that I was in line with Ifa before even knowing what Ifa had in line. And what that means is a lot of the virtues and morals that my grandmother and family instilled in me as a young man were ultimately the ones that Ifa was stipulating. Be a good son, be a good brother, be respectful to your elders, be loyal. Then I reference as well the video we just did on the 16 commandments of Ifa,
Mhm.
because those rules were already instilled in me before realizing they were Ifa's commandments. So once I realized that the way I was raised and what Ifa wanted from me were the same thing, it was very easy. And I think there was such a similarity there because when you look at Afro-Cuban, Afro-Caribbean descendant diasporic culture, we are more children of Africa than Portugal or Spain. And I'll be frank with you, when you look at Caribbean culture, sometimes I wonder if we're as African as Africa because, the way we speak, the way we interact, the concepts we have at home, even our food, these are things that, it's uncanny how similar they are. So that's how it really shaped me. It was basically the blueprint upon which my grandmother raised me, her being an Afro-Cuban woman.
Right. Would you say that that influence allowed you not to get caught up in the world? Or let me rephrase that. Have you ever got at a point when you were in your teenager years, get caught up in temptations of the world? And
Oh
then you
yeah.
kind of like put in the back burner the morality aspect because when you're in that teenage phase, especially a male energy, you have all this going on in your mind, and just, you hit puberty and then you hit just all types of different levels, and you're kind of like stuck in this element of confusion as there were some types of confliction. What influences allowed you to grow from that? Or if you could explain just kind of that portion of it.
No, that's a fabulous question, and I think it's something that we don't touch on enough. I'm from an area in Miami that a lot of nonsense happens from time to time. 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗲 and 𝗃𝗏𝗋, and ultimately moving here to Orlando back in the '90s when Orlando, it wasn't only Disney World, right?
Right.
So there was a lot of things. There's a lot of influences. Being a minority, being somebody that was exposed to a lot. Not having my father and mother separated at a very young age. So other men, such as my uncles coming in and filling that role, and my grandmother, ironically having a very strong masculine presence to be able to instill some things on me. I was very
Hmm.
lucky because I still had those influences, right? But this is the same reason, this question as to why I don't initiate very young men as 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗲s, because when we're going through that adolescence experience from about, I guess, 11 and a half, 12 to up until about the
Hmm.
time we're 21, really, when the brain starts settling, you're
Hmm.
still finding yourself, you're still understanding who you are. It's very difficult to ask so much from an 18-year-old young man to take on this code and lifestyle when they're still focused on experimenting, with partners, or learning, or playing video games, whatever it is that they're doing at any set age. It's very hard to take all those things away and say, hey, you need to completely focus on studying this and living this moral code. The virtue, I can't say ever left. My grandmother really instilled a lot of a high moral fiber within me, and I
Hmm.
always knew that I wanted to become a 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗲. So there were certain decisions that I made completely contingent upon that, even though it wasn't certain whether I was going to make it or not, because I didn't. You never really know if you're ever going to accomplish your dreams. So just being a collegiate student in Miami, being a young man in Orlando, you're presented with a lot of temptation, and I think the results of that can be seen in some of the people I grew up with not ending up in the same position I am right now, even though we come from a similar background. So I thank Ifa for that, because it always kind of provided me that handrail on the stairs towards my goals to never, fall off or lose focus, and ultimately, possibly extinguish my aspirations of being in this position.
Fantastic. So, anyone who is not who is not initiated into the religion, and say they come across a podcast, for example, yours, and starts to get some type of like ignited flame in them, do they have to be initiated into the religion in order to follow the religion?
That's a double-edged question, because you do not have to be initiated to experience the emotional pull towards the 𝗀𝗏𝗃. These are energies that are, very transcendent, and they will make you very emotional, and they will intrigue you to the point where you want to get closer to them. But to really create a formal relationship with any 𝗀𝗏𝗃 or any energy within the 𝗲 spectrum, you do need to at least receive your hand of 𝗲, which is the first initiation into this spirituality. And the reason being is because the 𝗀𝗏𝗃s are not reminded of who you are until 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁, via the divination that takes place,
Hmm.
reminds them, right? And this is because at the
Right.
moment of the selection of destiny, 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁 is the secretary of 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁. He's known as 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗁, right? He who is
Uh-huh.
next to 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁, or 𝗃𝗏𝗃, or he who was witness to destiny or prophecy. So we have to go through 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁 to be able to establish not only a relationship with the 𝗀𝗏𝗃s, but our ancestral self, which is
Right.
encompassed within the double helix of spiritual DNA that is a Odu of Ifa.
Fantastic. Now, say for example, somebody is going through a particular hardship in their life, and being of a Latino culture, say that you feel like you're having this spiritual pull. How can you differentiate that it's a spiritual pull that might be placing you on this particular path, heading in towards the direction of Ifa or Santeria, or it's not just a reaction? How could you tell the difference?
Well, to be frank with you, Ifa really doesn't stipulate or focus on the difference per se. The most important thing is that you're feeling pulled for whatever reason. You have people who show up to Ifa for legal issues. You have people who show up to Ifa for emotional and relationship issues. There's so many things that bring us here. You have people such as myself who felt a vocational call. The most important thing is getting back here. But usually they're synonymous. If you're feeling a call for whatever reason, whether it's romantically, whether it's legally, whether it's from a health standpoint, there's a spiritual aspect that's bringing you this way somehow, ultimately leading to a consultation or initiation to clarify things. Because as human beings, all we're really searching for is purpose and clarity. We don't know why we're here, and Ifa lets us know why. We're here to elevate, and ultimately 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁, or God, didn't see fit to be alone. So, whether we're his entertainment or whether we're his reiteration of the virtues he's trying to instill, through this experiment,
Mhm.
we're here, and we must find a way back home, and home is Ifa, or Africa, and these indigenous spiritualities, which were the first expressions.
Fantastic. I hear Ori. How does one connect to your Ori? And could you define what Ori means?
Absolutely. So when we look at the word ori literally means head. But when we break down the compound word that creates it, ori means I see, and it's making reference to the eye or head chakra, which lives right here, which is the third eye, and that's where destiny sits. So it's based on that point where we're able to identify where we're meant to go or how we're meant to get there. Ori is actually a concept of the divine personal, where it's the personal extension of our divine creator within our head, which gives us the capacity of free will, thought, creation, all the amazing things that human beings are able to do or have done up until this point. So you're born with Ori. The 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗃 says we are born with a head. He who does not have a head upon birth, it's life is not a possibility. Now, once we have Ori, what we now have as an obligation is to fulfill our debts with our Ori, which come in a multifaceted spectrum, whether it's receiving your hand of Ifa to identify your Ori or destiny, or actually receiving your Ile Ori icon to fulfill your debts specifically with that part of your body and spirituality. But Ori is literally the basis of the whole religion, right? Or spirituality, however you want to term it. Ifa is technically the oracle, right? Or blanket term. But the whole purpose of Ifa and all of the tools we have within it are to appease
Mhm.
Ori, our head, or our destiny, whether it's via the 𝗀𝗏𝗃s, invocations in the morning by rubbing our head, the whole concept of the secret. All of these things were identified in Africa thousands of years ago, and it's situated within the head, who, really occupies the precipice of the body, above the shoulders.
Great. And Olodumare, he is God. That I know. But anybody who just came up upon a podcast or some information, and how do you explain how do I say this? How do you explain the difference between the words that are chosen to define 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁 as God, and other people have different types of definitions and
Definitely.
utilize the name different? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, especially when we're referring to other spiritualities, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah,
So if
so
I say 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁 is God to me, right? And someone say, well, that's, how I see him. How would you explain that?
well, when you look at other spiritualities, and this isn't everybody, and this is very vague and blanketed, but sometimes we look at God within other, branches of spirituality as being someone who's meant to supervise, observe, or even punish. Olodumare is
Mhm.
a completely ulterior concept. The word Olodumare means the owner of time, right? He who is
Mhm.
infinite. It really transcends
Right.
all of these other positions, whether he's omnipresent, omniscient, all knowing, etc. Olodumare is simply present. He is time, right?
Mhm.
So when we begin to really delve into the philosophy behind that, he is nothing more than the reminder of our time is limited, as compared to his, where he's been witness to all of this creation that he enacted. So really, when we talk about our concept of God, he is a nurturer. He is somebody that is present. He is somebody that is vigilant, but not in the context to punish, but more to provide us options to be able to alleviate, right? All of
Mhm.
divine creation that led to human existence was prophecy, ultimately, that was enacted before maybe even he was there. But I think the most important thing to take away from the concept of Olodumare is to use our time wisely, because he's the only one who will be around even when we are gone. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get reassimilated back into, the concept that he is, which is that infinite expanse. So it's a little different, and that's what he means to me, as opposed to other people who are afraid of their God or are
Mhm.
worried, or, redemption. If anything, we shouldn't be worried about Olodumare. We have to be a little bit more cognizant of this concept of 𝘃cie. And 𝘃cie is the other side. He is the balance. Where Olodumare represents the light and creation, 𝘃cie
Right.
represents the darkness and the expanse of it within the universe, which leads to destruction, aka the black hole, right? So
Mhm.
Olodumare really is nothing more than the repository of 𝘃cie, or grace, or divine blessing, or creative power. But the one who disperses it is 𝘃cie, based on the tests that he does to people morally to see if they deserve it. And that's identified in the 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁𝗃 and 𝘃cie𝗂𝗃.
So can you elaborate more on 𝘃cie? Is he the same as 𝗃𝗏, from what I understand?
Yeah, so 𝘃cie and 𝗃𝗏 are like kind of like if someone wants to call me Joseph or Joe. They're basically two sides of the same coin. Where 𝗃𝗏 or 𝗃𝗏, and that term literally means he who carries the offerings,
Mhm.
was somebody that actually incarnated. He was a human being. He was a prince. He was Yoruba. He was all these different things. But through his deification process, he was able to be identified as the great transporter. He who takes the offerings from human beings on
Mhm.
earth to the deities in heaven. 𝘃cie is more primordial. He represents the dark expanse of the gray matter within our brain, the part that's in the back, primal, caveman instincts, the seven deadly sins, even though sinning isn't necessarily a concept within Ifa, it's the best way I can express it. 𝘃cie represents the complete opposite. But mind you, he's not evil. He is not Satan.
Right.
He is not Lucifer. He is not any of these things. He is simply he who maintains the balance through the negative repercussions that we garner through our own immoral actions as human beings, which is what we're trying to constantly overcome. Because the real reason for existence was because Olodumare created us to be able to combat evil, or that which is not natural, right? Because evil really isn't a
Right.
concept, but there are things that go against nature. Why we don't mistreat women, why we don't mistreat children, the elderly, people with needs. All of these things, Olodumare needed soldiers and warriors, us, the
Right.
human race, to be able to combat the 𝗃𝗏𝗃, the ajogun, which are the negativities, and who's meant to keep us in line, who's our general, is 𝘃cie. So that's
Mhm.
really the whole reason for existence, is to combat the things that are unnatural. That's what we're here for.
Great. And you had mentioned that Ifa doesn't recognize sinning. Is that what you indicated?
Yeah, there's really no concept of sin because when you look at sin, sin is punishable. Sin is, it's
Mhm.
seen as, dastardly. It's all these, horrible things. Now, mind you, the unnatural is as well, but it's a much less emotional connotation. Where sin is
Mhm.
seen as punishment because I'm a horrible person or I did horrible things, that which is unnatural is simply a repercussion of, unnatural or amoral actions. So let's say, I kill, like, for example, before this interview, I was on my way to, I was walking somewhere and I saw a cockroach in the middle of the street, right? And,
Right.
I could have killed the cockroach. My natural instincts, unfortunately, as a human being, I see the cockroach as a threat based on evolution. But I had a moment of
Right.
higher self where I said, I don't want to take any life today, no matter how minute it may seem. Maybe that kept
Mhm.
me from getting run over. Maybe if I would have stepped on the cockroach, maybe something would have happened to me. So it's
Right.
simply the balance. Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto yourself. And, try to make someone's situation even better as long as it still conveniences you. That's kind of our spiel.
We speak of our higher selves, and would you say that I have heard often is that when you are close to gaining um, to gain your ultimate goals in life, then you tend to have more challenges in life, and your higher self will be tested at times. So, for example, I'm going to use my son as an example. My son is very intuitive. We come from a strong line from my great grandmother, who was a very intuitive woman. She was the light in our family. When she died, a lot of that went with her, a lot of what the traditions that would have been brought down. Now, my son, being now 16 years old, is fighting more with temptations of the world. His higher self is now being tempted, and we'll say that he is kind of bending towards the lower part of what we would say his lower self, correct? How would you, what would you say to somebody at that age to try to maintain his balance in today's world as your higher self is being tempted and challenged? And it will be challenged, especially I feel more now with our children, our teenagers today.
I think this is one of the hardest times to be an adolescent. They have so many influences coming at them from social media. There's so much reiteration of instant gratification due to everything that's at their fingertips. It can set them up for failure, especially if a
Mhm.
household isn't run that way, as it shouldn't be. We should instill in our children that they can't have everything they want at a moment's notice, but it's difficult to really reinforce that when, as soon as you're done, disciplining them, they're able to get on the phone and look at whatever they wish.
Right.
For someone that's going through that stage, especially now, I think the biggest thing is trying to understand them, trying to redirect. Because if we try to impose, we're long gone from the days of old school discipline. My grandmother used to
Mhm.
get the sandal on me. Those things don't work anymore. And I don't
Right.
know how productive they were back then, but Lord knows I think that woman saved my life every time she lifted a sandal on me. And I knew she loved me. But when you have a
Right.
6'5" 5-year-old, and she was 5 feet tall, I mean, those were the only tools she
Right.
had. You know what I'm saying? So, but for someone going through that situation, especially with all these negative influences, is a lot of redirection. Really occupying their time, really delving into what their thought processes is. I think a lot of negative behaviors stem from the anxiety of not being adequate enough. I mean, when you look at all these influences, especially a young man, and I'm a real I have a real issue with what's going on YouTube now in general, where you see a
Right.
lot of these podcasts and a lot of these gentlemen, really pushing a false narrative upon a demographic between the ages of 18 to like 31 of this is what your life should look like. So there's a supercar parked in front of a mansion and being driven by a guy who wears a $1,000 suit, who is pushing this narrative of,
Mhm.
I have 8 wives and I'm not obligated to anybody. I have no kids. And,
Right.
I have a real serious issue with that because as somebody who is married, has children, has a healthy home, and understand what it really takes to get to that, I don't think we should be telling young men or young people that you can do a mentorship program or do this and you're automatically going to be successful. I think success has so much more to do than with that is economic. And I think that's our biggest obstacle as parents is really removing them from this pseudo reality that is social media and these podcasts and whatnot, and really taking them a step back and letting them see this is what it actually takes to become successful. You don't, now, mind you, residual income and all these things are very real. But at the same time, it
Hmm.
takes work to get there, especially if you want it to be satisfying. Some people are born in a great economic situation, but it even takes work there to take 1 million and turn it into 10 billion. So it takes work. And I think after COVID and with, this technological uproar that we're going through, people don't want to work or feel pain because they don't think it's actually necessary to be able to be successful. So how do you take that to a 16-year-old young man? It's exposing them to people other than ourselves as
Hmm.
parents, because they're always going to doubt us because for some reason
Hmm.
the brain doesn't want to accept that the people that created us can guide us. You have to expose them
Right.
to other really legitimate people, rather than allowing our kids to be influenced by YouTube. And mind you, there's positive outlets such as ourselves, but we can never replace great parenting.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. Now, with this vast, I feel like onset, I am, of course, my phone and my channels, they're catching the algorithm of everything that enlightens me. So your podcast, other podcasts of the religion and things of that nature. How can somebody who is not familiar know the difference between authentic, let's say, authentic babalaos or authentic podcasts, authentic that are pulling from the actual virtues and philosophies of Ifa, and not that just somebody decided to pull a podcast together and start kind of just filling the air with information that they would have gotten online. And that, how can you tell the difference?
Well, it's an epidemic. I mean, anybody can get in front of a nice camera like Phil has and say, I'm this and I'm that, right? Because it looks good, it sounds good. And,
Hmm.
people are attracted to aesthetics. And if somebody has a decent vocabulary, they can pass for anything in front of one of these things. But I think it goes back to a lesson my grandmother taught me. She said, Joseph, you never give your money to anybody that you haven't seen, smelled, or heard. And that always stuck with me. And that's the best advice I can give to people who encounter a podcast such as ours or anyone else's. The
Hmm.
information may be great, but that real defining moment is when you shake that person's hand or spend an hour in front of them on the phone, and really gauge them and feel them out. And of course, you have to compare their own narrative to the community's narrative, because anybody can sit in front
Right.
of a camera and say how great they are, how wonderful what they're going to do for you is. But when you're able to find that to be synonymous with the overall reaction from the community, whether it's theirs or others, that's when you know you have a real professional or a real option in front of you. Because nowadays people are, getting taken serious advantage of because, and another thing is you have to be very patient because you have to go through this interview process, because in reality the client is interviewing the professional, really, because they're being
Right.
hired for a service. And even though this is a priesthood, there is a professional aspect to it. So my biggest advice is interact with these people before we start, investing in them and their vision and how it could possibly benefit you. I can't tell you the amounts of people that have gotten caught up in these schemes, like what we were just speaking
Right.
about with some of these programs and podcasts. Thousands of dollars guaranteeing results that cannot be guaranteed, because no matter how many podcasts we watch or how many books we buy or how many seminars we attend, we still have to get to
Hmm.
work. We still have to knock on a door or read the book, or amassing information and connections is not enough to turn it into profits and stability. So touch the people you're giving your money to, interact with them, speak with them, do comparables, and take your time, so that way when you make that decision, it's not the wrong one.
Okay. That's a great answer. Can you speak to me about the seven African powers? There are some people, if you were to walk into, say, for example, last year I spoke to a woman. I said, can you talk to me about the seven African powers? And she was going to start touching on Orishas. But from what I understand, it is not the Orishas. Can you please elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So a lot of people have the concept that the seven African powers was a candle that was invented in New York around the 50s or 60s. And it is that to a certain degree. There is a candle called the seven African powers with seven different orishas, such as Orula, Shango, etc. And it has seven
Hmm.
colors and whatnot. So that's what most people think it is. But in reality, The concept of the seven African powers, or las siete potencias africanas, is born in the Odu of 𝗿𝗲𝗍. And in the Odu of 𝗿𝗲𝗍 was where, the diaspora was about to begin, and Africa was beginning to become invaded by foreigners, specifically the Portuguese and the Spanish, right?
Right.
And what occurred was is these tribes that used to be warring factions and feuding decided to unify and create an alliance to be able to defend themselves the best they could. Amongst these were the Yorubas, the Bantu people from the Congo, the people from 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃, known as the Efik, all of the descendant tribes that ultimately arrived in the Caribbean, specifically Cuba, they unified to be able to defend themselves, to which a certain degree they were successful, but, we can't save everybody, right? Because
Right.
unfortunately the slave trade was meant to happen, to be able to expand 𝗃𝗏, even though it was a horrible method, to say the least. But that's really what the seven African powers are. It's the seven tribes that
Right.
unified to be able to defend themselves. Now, there's another Bataki within that same Odu that says it was seven different clans, each of them worshiping a different Egun or spirit that called upon those energies to ultimately achieve the same goal. So these are a couple of the different root explanations of that concept. But you see it reiterated a little bit in the candle because each color there represents one of the tribes, and each of those orishas represent a different clan and following. So they weren't too far off, but the random botanica owner who was trying to make a profit didn't have time to educate themselves on a product that was flying off the shelf. That has to be one of the top three most popular candles sold within our industry.
Hmm. Fantastic. Okay, and so moving forward, what here in on the West Coast, I feel like Santeria is a stigma. There's still a stigma regarding Santeria. When someone says Santeria, they right away start thinking about sacrificing, but they don't go into research to find out the reasons why sacrifice is so important to the religion, or they don't go back, to find out the reasons why how it started or how it began. What would your message be out here in the West Coast? Because in the East Coast, you can definitely find, like botanicas, you can definitely find a babalao, you can definitely find the things that you need in order to get more information, to get more in depth into the religion. Out here, we don't have that. What would your message be for us out here, and how can we start spreading the word where we're correctly defining Santeria? And in that same regard, is Santeria an extension of Ifa?
Awesome. So, what we have to recall is that all spiritualities at some point delved into animal sacrifice. What we
Mhm.
really have to analyze is why is Ifa and Santeria so stigmatized? Is it because it's Afro descendant? Is it because, we think that everything that is primitive is ignorant? That's what we really have to be careful with because if you look at, things even such as the Santa Muerte clan, that
Mhm.
is found on the west coast due to Mexico and Aztec
Mhm.
indigenous beliefs over there. There's animal sacrifice there. So what is the difference between that and Santeria as far as acceptance wise? And I think it is due to a lack of information, like you stated.
Mhm.
So people, the first thing they have to do is analyze, why do I feel this way about this, and then clarify, is this the way I really feel it to be, or is this what's being propagated upon me by whatever establishment to keep us from coming in contact with our ancestral selves? Because if we don't know who we are, we're weaker, right? But if we know who we
Right.
are and where we come from as a humankind, we have power through our knowledge and self awareness. As
Mhm.
far as the West Coast specifically, there's a very, a lot of Christian, Catholic
Mhm.
influence there. When you look at Mexico and the process that happened over there in California, towards the West, it is scary. But even within that, you always saw in Mexico, from what I've been told from my godchildren, there was always shamanism. There was always
Mhm.
epiritismo. There was always like root work and things like that. So what I think really needs to happen is just the identification of all of these concepts are present within Ifa the same way. So I think it's recognizing that we are practicing Ifa even though we have it by another name. And that's
Right.
where the Santeria Ifa connection comes in, because Santeria is nothing more than legitimate Ifa practice where you occasionally see a Catholic saint. But the Catholic saint does not interrupt any of our indigenous practice. For example, whenever we perform a ceremony, at least in my house, There isn't a Spanish word or any other word uttered except for Yoruba, right?
Hmm.
So regardless if there's a San Lázaro statue in the room somewhere, maybe because I didn't get a chance to move it before we started, it's not taking away from our legitimacy. And I think a lot of people like to get hung up on that, like, oh, you have Catholic saints. Well, I mean, it's
Hmm.
just a decoration in my home, ultimately, but we are as Yoruba as it gets. So
Hmm.
Santeria isn't even really a branch of Ifa. It is Ifa. It's just the occasional Catholic saint, just kind of scattered around, but it really has no negative influence over our dogma whatsoever.
I hear ancestors a lot when we speak of Ifa or Santeria. So I feel like into the present day, we tend to lose it's almost like no one identifies our ancestors or the sacrifices they made for them. I remember one time trying to explain to someone that I knew who was going through a difficult time that we need to really draw from our ancestors because it is through that line that we're still here. That's how strong the line was that we are here in the present day, that we still stand. What is your recommendation, or how would you explain, like, if someone was just lost again and they were not connected to their ancestors? What is the importance to be connected into our ancestors, and how can we get that connection back?
Wow. Well, I mean, when you look at any spirituality that's legitimate, it's completely based on ancestor worship, regardless of
Hmm.
whichever demographic it is. And the importance cannot be, overstated. I mean, every time we take a step and our foot touches the earth, our ancestors are below the earth supporting that foot and structure spiritually. So if you're not in line with them or connected with them, whether it be by your hand of Ifa or receiving your 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗏 icon, you're completely out of balance. To the point where after the hand of Ifa, usually the first thing we recommend after they get the things done from their divination is receiving their 𝗃𝗏𝗏, because without your ancestors, you're really lost out here. And I was just thinking about this the other day. You really look at the experience of the primitive man and woman, it was nothing short
Hmm.
of traumatic. This morning
Right.
I was able to wake up with my daughter shaking my shirt and smiling in my face. 5,000 years ago, I might not have had that luxury. I might have been sleeping in a tree with my child strapped to my back with a knife in my hand, expecting to die every day. So
Right.
when we look at that experience and that process, how can we not honor these people? And then you look at what our ancestors did as far as the slaves, and them just being able to bring over the expansive knowledge that they were able to under the worst conditions. It's nothing short of a miracle and a tribute to human fortitude. So to not honor them, whether it be through a sacrifice or be through just reiterating all the great things they left us, is a real it's a real tragedy. So
Hmm.
that's how important our ancestors are to us. We would not be here without them, and then the only way we make it to heaven, or whatever you want to call it, is through our children, through the people we impact while we're here. Your legacy is what makes you 𝘃𝗏𝗏. So it has to be perfect. It has to be great. You have to do as much as you can to lift and be lifted.
Would you say that it's because of their belief system that gave them the strength to be able to go through so much trauma after they were just yanked out of their place of being? How would you describe, like, how could they have sustained so much and still be able to pass through generations and give us all that we needed in today? But today's society, our children, especially, I feel like today's generation, I feel like there's a sense of weakness there, that they don't believe in themselves in the way that our ancestors had to have believed in order for them to be able to survive each and every day without rest. What would you say to that?
Well, I think our children are being disadvantaged as far as their own fortitude, because they're looking on a camera screen and seeing all of the things they haven't accomplished yet, as opposed to a young man in Africa who was being groomed by his elders and by his family to be great.
Mhm.
And it's not that there aren't great parents out there trying to reinforce this into the minds of their children on a daily basis. It's just, it's hard when you're able to have a 15-minute conversation with your kid versus 4 hours of internet stimulation saying the contrary.
Right.
We're fighting an uphill battle here. And I'm not saying take the phone away. I'm saying we have to be more involved in our children's lives than ever before because they're being handicapped by technology to a certain degree. I think,
Right.
spirituality and hope is one of the most necessary things to be able to sustain life. Because when you really look at it, what are we doing down here? You look at this podcast, you look at anybody who's doing anything. Are we just killing time, or are we going to, actually do something productive and make an impact for those to come? And I think our ancestors found that support within their spirituality, knowing that this is not even the beginning. This is the prequel. When we transition
Right.
is the beginning of our story, really. So, knowing that when the divination was done and 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗶, or one of these various signs came out saying, hey, this is the process we have to go through to become eternal. I think they just really, they tied their boots, or, their sandals very hard, and they said, we're going to go through this with elegance and morale. And a lot of people were lost, but I think it was through that they were able to sustain. The same way anybody who's gone through genocide or oppression was able to. You look at Jewish people, you look at Native Americans in this country, Mexican Americans when the way they were treated on the West Coast, Asians. When you look and you're going through so much trauma and so much oppression, you face adversity the only way you can, which is head on. If war is imminent, please don't try to deter it. It's like Winston Churchill said, if we're trying to avoid a war that is already on our beach, everybody pick up a gun. So I would
Right.
say that.
What is the first steps when someone says, okay, this is for me? I feel like this is where I'm drawn to. This is my path. What's the beginning stages of getting involved into the religion?
The first steps, are identifying why you want to get involved in Ifa. Even before you
Okay.
reach out to anybody, what are you feeling? And every reason is legitimate, but it's very important to identify that so you can be able to gauge your progress within Ifa, because we become spiritual to elevate and progress. Once you've been able to identify that, then at that point you start looking for a professional, somebody that's ethical, reputable, recognized, and that may take some time. And you want to take more time in that than actually going through your initiation, because the person you select is ideally going to be your one source and fountain of knowledge and process. So watch a podcast, look at reviews, compare the
Mhm.
negative with the positive, see which one outweighs the other. Parlay with 3 to 4 people so you can get some comparables. And it's very similar to a romantic relationship or dating process, platonically, in the sense of, does it feel right? You know, you could pick a
Right.
doctor. Does it feel right? The lawyer. Does it feel right? We cannot deny our intuition, replacing it with science and hypothesis. So you have to take that into account, because that's your own spirituality, vibrating with someone else's. And if you're in frequency, then you can move forward, especially if all the commonsensical, criteria have been checked out. So once you have a professional, at that point, you start coordinating to receive your hand of Ifa, to be formally involved in Ifa, to identify who your guardian Orisha is, if they do that. And then apart from that, your life sign, which everybody does. So those are really the first steps. And at that point, you belong to a house. You start learning.
Hmm.
𝗲𝗏𝗏 tells you what you're meant for within this, what your possibilities are. And then at that point, it comes down to vocation and means to see if you want to pursue that or not.
Fantastic. Speak to me of the beads. I know that there's beads that go around your neck, and I've also seen beads around your wrist. Can you speak to me about both of those?
Absolutely. So the bracelet is known as ide, right? The necklace is known as 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃, but some people call it 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, which means the big
Hmm.
ide. And what happened is in the Odu of, there's various Odus that speak of each of them. For example, the
Hmm.
necklace is present in the Odu of 𝗏𝗏𝗏 as well as 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃. And it was to ward off sickness and to always remind people of, who we are, to never lose our
Hmm.
identity. And apart from that, to recognize positions. So for example, if I was walking around some part of Nigeria and I had these things on, it'd be pretty evident to see I'm a Babalawo. And it was to receive the pleasantries and courtesies that come with that. Maybe a salutation, maybe a glass of water, very old world things that, are the basis of living. The bracelet is in the Odu Okanasode, as well as the Odu
Hmm.
Obefunfunlo. And it was to ward off death. And death was trying to hunt Orumila's son. And once he put on the beads, Death knew he was a son of Orula, and he respected him, being that Orula and Death had a pact to only take people when it was their predestined moment, with Orumila having the final say whether they could be saved or not. So it has to do with status, it has to do with spiritual protection, and it also has to do with that reminder of who we are. It's our flag. So when you see the different combinations, let's say if this was red and white, it would signify me as a Shango priest, right? Or if it was
Okay.
all yellow, an Oshun priest, which I am. I just, I don't walk around with, 8 necklaces on all day because they get kind of heavy. So I
Hmm.
keep it pretty simple unless we're in ceremony. But that's really what they signify, is it's who we are. It's our identity.
And how can I hear a lot about someone gaining another Orisha? Can you tell me what that means?
Absolutely. So within your sign of hand of Ifa, the first Orisha you're supposed to receive is Orumila, and synonymously you'll receive Eshu as well. But
Hmm.
there are various Orishas associated with your sign. So each of them is going to provide something different to you based on you fulfilling that debt with them. So let's say in the Odu of 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁, right? Let's say you come out a child of Shango, right? But in that
Hmm.
sign, apart from Shango, Batala or Eshu provides huge benefits. You may have things you have to do with them or to receive them, right? So you
Hmm.
receive deities, they go through a very specific process. They're composed of natural materials and
Hmm.
they provide benefits. Now, mind you, time frames as far as when you're going to see those benefits is really, it's on a case by case basis. It could be while you're going through the ceremony, it could be in 3 months, it could be in a year, but ultimately it will fulfill because I'm a testament to that. So, and all of us are.
Hmm. I've heard the word trance. People or individuals that are in the religion experiencing trance. Can you explain how someone is identified that that is the person that's going to be gaining this experience or being touched by trance? Or can you explain to me how that works? Because I know that there are different orishas that can actually that experience can happen with. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really rudimentary, and what I mean by that is we really don't know. You could have somebody that has a sign that says, "Yeah, you're going to be big trance," and they never come down with anything. And then you have the
Hmm.
person you least expect that they're a walking spirit at that point because they're constantly coming in and out.
Hmm.
You really don't know. But the best way to put yourself in a position, if you're spiritually eligible for that, is to be pure of heart. The Orishas use
Hmm.
us like suits or sleeves, and the purer we are, the easier it is to facilitate that process. If we come with intentions or negativity or negative karma, they're not going to want to use that body. So now, mind you, as
Right.
far as symptoms, you'll see the shaking. You might see some eyes rolling back in the head. Some of it's stereotypical, some of it is not. Like, depending on how each Odisha, assimilates said body, we really don't know.
Hmm.
But there are certain, phenomena that are very, concurrent between people, but it's really a singular experience based on the person.
Can you please explain to me the year in white? And would you consider that as a rite of passage?
Absolutely. I mean, mind you, in Africa they don't do the year in white. You just wear white during your ceremony. The year in white, known as the 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁, is to identify an iyawo. The word iyawo means bride, and what happens is in the Odu of Obekana, it was identified when we initiate into Orisha, we become their spiritual mate, right? Spiritually, platonically. So what happens is
Hmm.
is it's a year of purity where you're dedicating your life in its entirety to that energy to be able to reap all the benefits that come from that discipline. I really attribute all of my spiritual success and progresses through really carrying on a very positive, disciplined year in white, which was facilitated by my grandmother and mother. So it's paid dividends, and Oshun
Hmm.
rewarded me handsomely by allowing me to becoming a Babalao.
Oh, fantastic. That's amazing. I feel like I have more questions.
Yeah,
Just
definitely. I
like,
mean,
um,
we've covered some great things, and I think the questions have been fabulous. Definitely.
yes, it's amazing. I feel like there's just so much, and the philosophies of Ifa are just, we talk about discipline. It just when you read all of this information and you speak to individuals like you and those who are in the religion, I feel like it just kind of gives you this grand spectrum of so much value and knowledge too, especially when in today's society, it's just so there's so much confliction that can happen with the person, especially those of us of a certain type of culture. When getting caught up in the world is just can be so overwhelming. And going back to your roots, which is I appreciate the name of your podcast, I feel like that's something that we all need to connect to at some point, because the more that we lose that, the more that we get lost in today's world when we shouldn't be. Because if anything, that was the whole point of taking everybody out of Africa, to strip them from their identity and to have them get lost into what somebody else was creating. This way, when we have podcast knowledge just put out there into the world, it allows us to at some point identify like, oh, I'm not supposed to be part of this particular transition. I'm supposed to continue on the path.
No, absolutely. And I think the information we've been able to relate is going to provide with an awesome project and material for your classmates to be able to grow and possibly even, get involved themselves. So from all of us here, we sincerely appreciate you.
Thank you so much for taking again your time to be able to speak to me, answer all my questions, and I'm just real elated to be able to put all of this on paper. And I feel like it's going to just give my paper just that much more depth.
Definitely one of the best ones. I mean, really your setups and stuff like that. I mean,
I was just telling him that was the best interview that anyone has ever given to you.
yeah.
And I was
And
telling Phil that part of my instructions was to step outside of my comfort zone. And for me, this is stepping outside of my comfort zone. When I got invited onto the show, I was like, for a good day, I had to really like embrace all that and just allow it to just kind of overfill me, because it was really an honor to be able to speak to someone vocally, someone who I've been following. It's like, for me, it's like you're an amazing celebrity to me, just because, and it's not just a
wow.
celebrity status as you would see like Hollywood type. I'm talking about just being able to connect with you on this particular level, and then to further my education. Like you and Phil have had a hand in furthering my education, allowing me to be able to grow just from today to tomorrow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why I love doing these because, academia is always something I felt strongly about, even though I personally didn't finish in the conventional sense. So, any way we can play a part or lend a hand in understanding our philosophy better, being that there
Hmm.
really isn't much conventional recognized
Right.
knowledge on it, just to be at the forefront of that is it's very humbling. I never expected any of that. I was just happy to do 𝗲𝗏. I never thought, there would be interviews and just talking about 𝗃𝗏𝗏 to
Right.
provide. So, you're very talented. And the ironic thing about comfort zones is when we step out of them, we usually find a new comfort zone, you
Mm.
know?
Mm.
Hmm.
And I think you found one. I think as you delve deeper, I mean, you never know where it could take you, but just understanding human behavior. And I really enjoyed the questions, as far as delving into my behavior, because it's something I've always, scrutinized and analyzed. And, just having the opportunity to kind of delve into my thought process and go back to those old feelings and experiences was really alleviating.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, I appreciate that, and super quick. I was talking to you about being lost last year and coming across your podcast, and my children were looking at me like, "What are you doing now, Mom?" Because to them, it's completely foreign to bring
Yeah.
spirituality like back, to reconnect with my roots, to reconnect and try to find out information about my great grandmother, more so on a foundation that we should have been learning all this time. I am the only one at this point passing all that down, recreating everything that needed to transition from, because we didn't have anybody to do that. So this really allowed me to connect on a spectrum just by listening to you and the Batakis, and just by just taking that fortitude in a way that I can encompass all that to bring to my household. So just so you know that what you do and what Phil does and your wife, I mean, it's incredible to be able, and I'm a single mother in this world trying to fighting against the grain, and to lose that at some point. I think that was the reasons why I had that spiritual pull. And it was important for me to be able to bring all of this into my paper, because when you go into the classrooms, even at the anthropology, what do they normally talk about if not Christianity, if not
Sure.
Catholicism, if not I don't hear about Santeria Ifa, and that should be like implemented. Someone needs to speak about that in the classrooms, because we need to be able to identify that outside of everything else. That's like, you talk about that, and I was telling Phil, I'm probably the only one having a paper or creating a paper based upon Santeria and Ifa.
Yeah, it's gonna be banging, and I extend myself to you just like I extend myself to anyone that wants to take advantage of the platform or just asking questions and talking. It's great content. People really enjoy it. So anybody that you know as you move forward in your academic process, or maybe even you again in the future, um,
Absolutely.
yeah, please to let them know about us. Let them know we're willing to sit down, and it's great for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome interview with Christine, guys, and we got some shout outs for you now.
That's right. The elevator music is back.
Oh, thank you.
All right, folks. Thank you all for tuning in. This was a fantastic episode. So if you haven't had
Great
a chance
interview.
yet, please hit that like and definitely share this with someone who is interested in Ifa. This is going to be one of those episodes to where if you want to learn something new, this is the one. All right. So we have a membership program. We want to give shout outs to the people who show love to us. So here we go. We got some VIP shout outs to Robert Cifuentes for 7 months.
Rob, thank you so much. Great to hear from you all the
Wow.
time.
All right. We got 𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗲𝗏.
Bendiciones.
We got 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗍.
Bendiciones.
Shout out to Trinarican Goddess for
Oh.
6 months.
Mijada, bendiciones.
7 months shout out to Richard Massey.
Wow, thank you, Rich. My regards.
And we got super fans now. We got a new one. This is 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗃.
Cookie, blessings. Thank you.
All right. Oh, there we go. And we got 6 months for Joaquin Mendez.
Joaquin, bendiciones, mijao.
And Gilly84 for 6 months.
Gilly, thank you guys
Wow.
all. And if you know anybody that could benefit from the channel and the program, please let them know. And, from Christine, from myself, Phil, Our
Yes.
Roots, until next time, see the light.
Bye, Christine.
Bye. Have a great day.